Well, greetings once again, poetry lovers, and welcome to our presentation on Gerard Manley Hopkins' Curtal Sonnets. Just a word of warning, this presentation is going to be more technical than the other sort of unpackings of his poems. But for those of you who are Hopkins scholars, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation about a truly innovative form. All right, so as George Michael used to say on the sports machine back in the early 80s, let's go to the video. So here we've got a pictorial representation of a curtal. You probably know this this animal as a bobtail, and sing about this sort of horse every year when we sing Jingle Bells. So let's see here. So what a curtal sonnet then is a shortened version of a full sonnet, and specifically the shortened version of the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. So just as a reminder, Hopkins was a theorist, and although he had not much in terms of a formal training in poetry, he was nonetheless a student of the genre. And so he may not have gotten it there in his university studies, but again was devoted to poetics and to the sort of technical elements of the form. So again, this is so unlike sprung rhythm, which was an extension of verse systems that had already been in place. This is truly an innovative way of looking at the sonnet form. So worth mentioning is that he's not merely then shortcutting the traditional form, he's experimenting with a new form. So this is from the author's preface. This is from Robert Bridges' publication of Hopkins sonnets in 1918. So I'm quoting here from the author's preface. Some of the sonnets in this book are in 5 foot, some in 6 foot or Alexandrine line. So the Alexandrine is a 12-beat line. Generally, you've got a caesura there after the 6th syllable in that line. And so he says they are constructed in proportion resembling those of the sonnet proper, namely, and he goes on to give us the math on this, 6 plus 4 stanzas instead of 8 plus 6, with a half line tailpiece. So the equation is rather 12 over 2 plus 9 over 2 equals 21 over 2, or 10 and a half. Okay, so let's see here. So what we're supposed to take away from this is that the relation of the two divisions of the curtal sonnet is proportionally identical with those of the Petrarchan. So the fraction 12 over 2 is to 9 over 2, as 8 is to 6, and both are reducing the expression then 4/3. So the way to look at this is if we place an emphasis on the strict classical form of the sonnet, the way he looked at it was you considering the amount of meaning that can be held in the sonnet mode. So you recall our conversations about the sonnet and its development, starting with Giacomo de Lentini, and then on through Petrarch, and then Wyatt, Sir Thomas Wyatt, Henry Howard. The sonnet as a form was very new, okay, and so very compact on the page, whereas most poets were measured by, and they tested their mettle through longer poems, okay. So long narrative type poems. So the sonnet was obviously very different in that regard. Okay, so Hopkins views the sonnet as a traditional received form, and really only takes 2 into consideration, despite his influence by Milton and Edmund Spenser, both of whom played around with the sonnet form. Hopkins is only really considering the English and the Italian. So extrinsically, in his view, they're the same. The major architecture is 14-line poem that rhetorically, as we've discussed before, is an argument. Okay, so the minor structure then has to do with stanza types, meter, and turn of the poem's logic. However, intrinsically, the Italian and the English sonnets are different, and and that difference then is in language. Okay, so so what I mean by that, before I go on to what Pitchford has to say about this, is that we talked about the fact that that if you are writing, so among the verse systems that we've discussed, if one is pure syllabic, then you concern yourself with having an identical number of syllables per line. Okay, we talked about the fact that individual syllables have varying temporal qualities, meaning that they have duration. So the syllable it is super short, and it also cuts off there with that hard T, whereas a single syllable like squelch or squinch, these are way longer in the mouth. Okay, and they sort of trail off. So when you think about a poet using the syllable in order to make meaning, we discussed that in Ozymandias, how the last word is away, and how that word trails off, just like the sands that the speaker is referring to at the end of that poem. Okay, so Lois Pitchford then in her article on the Curtal Sonnets of Hopkins from 1952 uses this analogy. She says, in a balloon filled with air, one can increase the pressure by inflating the balloon with more air, or by compressing the size of the balloon. So one of Hopkins's criticisms of particularly of English sonnets is that they were flabby, okay, or they had laxity in the lines. Another criticism that he had of, and this is the genesis sort of for his experiments with respect to sprung rhythm, is his belief then that the iambic meter, specifically iambic pentameter, that was so characteristic of English poetry, was so regular as to be boring and redundant. So this is why he starts to play around again with the arrangement of syllables in order to create tension between the stressed syllables. And so if we've got like like the first paean, as you recall, is a stressed followed by 3 unstressed syllables. So those unstressed syllables then, create a certain tension that is then picked up when you have the next stressed syllable make an appearance. Okay, so because the Italian language is just different from English, then again he's taking a look at those dimensions as well with respect to trying to create meaning in the poem. Okay, so to approximate the pressure of the Italian sonnet, then Hopkins enlarges most of his sonnets. So this is him. This is the first stages of the innovation. Okay, so he starts by enlarging the sonnets by various technical devices. So using a 6 and even 8 beat line. And what I mean by beat here, and what he means by beat, is stressed syllables. Okay, so you're obviously then going to have more unstressed syllables. So back to the verse systems, we're talking about like the pure accentual system. We know that the feature of that system is an identical number of stressed syllables per line. Okay, so this is what one of the first things that Hopkins starts to do in terms of playing with the form. Then he uses a coda. So just as to explain it through music, a concluding section that's formally distinct from the main section. And then in the terrible sonnets, he uses longer syllables and ellipses. Okay, so just a quick refresher on the Petrarchan or Italian sonnet specifics. So in general, we're talking about a single statement of an idea. Both, as we mentioned before, both English and Italian sonnets are arguments, but in the case of the Italian, it's a 2-part argument because of the octave and the sestet, whereas in the English sonnet, you've got the 3 quatrains and a couplet. Generally, your sort of dismount or conclusion is in the couplet. Okay, so you've got this harmony with the division of the poem into two quatrains. All right, so we talked about the fact that the ABBA rhyme scheme is otherwise known as a double envelope quatrain. And then he looks at the sestet as being two-part, and it's two tercets. So his his preference was typically for the CDE version, because that divides more neatly into the two distinct tercets. So the pause, and we talk about that as the volta, the Italian word for turn, that's required by the sense with almost perfect regularity at the end of the line. And you've got this complete break anywhere inside the line is therefore avoided, okay? So in the Curtal Sonnets, after having experimented with these longer versions, so longer lines and so forth, in the 14-line version, he says, okay, well, let me reverse field here, and let's try it by say having, let's compress the number of total lines and reimagine the sonnet form totally, okay? So it's beyond the scope of this presentation to talk about linguistics and how we would go about, you know, say, and even semantics for that matter. How do you measure meaning in any poem? But keeping the amount, again, his words, amount of meaning in the English sonnet constant and altering the extrinsic form to fit it. So it appears, and this is not just Pitchford, but this is other other scholars that that talk about this. You know, G.F. Leahy and even Dr. Bridges, Robert Bridges, who published the poems in 1918, you know, talk about what it appears he's doing is trying to do in 10.5 lines what other English sonneteers were doing then in 14. Okay, so has the same amount of meaning in the Curtal Sonnets as the Petrarchan sonnets did then, and made the sonnet more compact by shortening the external form. So here's an example in that collection of 1918. This is what Hopkins refers to as, this is poem 13, and then the other Curtal sonnet is poem 22, which is a poem called Peace that's in the that I've got that available in the module this week. And if anybody's watching this this video outside of the context of our class, send me a message in the notes, and I can send you a copy of the sonnet piece. Okay, so here's pied beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire cold chestnut balls, finches wings, landscape plotted and piece, fold, fallow and plow, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim, all things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change, praise him. So you can see then that the count is the 6 lines, then of the open, then the 4, and you can see that distinct division between the two things. And then the tail piece is a Demeter, and say spondy, praise him. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to just to point out in Pitchford's article from 1952, she uses the G.F. Leahy's scansion of the poem. Unfortunately, he scans it as having only 4 beats per line, and it's clear from Hopkins's notes that that these sonnets were intended to be either 5 or 6, again, stressed syllables per line. So in following that, in following Hopkins's direction, then you can see, and if you want to stop this and take a look, you can see that if we adhere to the pure accentual verse system, then and add on some of the things relative to sprung rhythm, you can see that this is how we would scan it for the 5-beat 5 beats per line in this opening, the sestet. Okay, something like the truncated octave. If you want to take a look at that. Okay, so so you'll notice then that that the division of thought in the poem happens at the same place that it would happen in an Italian sonnet. Okay, but in addition to the compression of the lines, just it's and I've got another presentation out there where I unpack this poem, and I'm looking more at poetics, acoustics in particular. But you can just see how unbelievably rich this poem is in elements of acoustics. Just the sibilance in those early lines about stipple and swim. You've got all the alliteration there in the beginning. Glory be to God, and so forth. So if you unpack the poem, looking at it or take a look through that lens, you'll see just how marvelous this poem is, and how very little room there is for further compression. So you'll see that there's, look for articles. You just aren't going to find any. Okay, so he doesn't waste a word, a syllable in this particular poem. So it's definitely a poem worth study, and we'll be talking about this one more in class. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and see you soon.